I was really lucky that the first person I spoke to about my mental health challenges, after years of struggling with OCD, more than a decade, and all sorts of other related issues, I was really lucky that the first person I spoke to was a close friend who had dealt with alcohol addiction. And he had spoken openly about his challenges and his recovery and how he was maintaining that recovery. And it was really valuable to talk to him first because he was able to look at the struggles that I was dealing with through the perspective of addiction. And since he was the only person I knew who was speaking openly about their mental health, that really shaped my perspective on what I was dealing with. I was dealing with compulsive behavioral issues. So to me, I saw them as the same. Experiencing some urge, some anxiety, some uncertainty, something inside, and then acting in a particular way to get rid of that feeling or to control that feeling. So today I'm going to share with you a couple insights that came from approaching OCD as an addiction and how that perspective was really valuable for recovery and stays valuable for maintaining recovery. So I'm going to talk about 5 things. The first is to cut out compulsions, and this might seem really obvious, but one of the reasons I think I was very lucky to talk to a friend who had struggled with alcohol, rather than first going online to participate in OCD forums and websites and things like that devoted to OCD online, is because often the focus online is how to keep OCD, how to relieve anxiety, how to deal with the feelings, how to get rid of the obsession, but to keep the behaviors. That the behaviors are often seen as normal. People will argue about, well, it was okay, like that's a rational reason to engage in that behavior. Trying to rationalize the compulsions isn't valuable. So it was really helpful for me to look at OCD and look at the compulsions and say, okay, well, these are the things that I'm going to cut out. These are the things that I'm addicted to, engaging in all these different compulsions. So the big first step is going to be to stop engaging in them. And that includes compulsions that are in our heads too. It's very difficult. It's like having a stash of drugs up there. We can engage in those compulsions anytime we want. We can try to find relief from whatever we're feeling and we don't like, and we can just ruminate and check and try to remember. All of those things are compulsions too. Doesn't matter if they're in your head or they're out in the world where you can see them. They're also compulsions that we need to take those first steps to cut out. And yes, that's very difficult. Some of these other insights will hopefully help when it comes to dealing with the extreme amount of difficulty that's involved in cutting out compulsions when you have your substance available to you at any moment. In fact, it's stashed up away in your brain, or it's just right there with your hands, wherever it may be. The second insight that I want to talk to that comes from looking at OCD as an addiction really builds on that first one of cutting out compulsions. And it's to not get superficial when it comes to looking at what the compulsions are. And by that, I'm specifically talking about themes. So I find it's very unhelpful and quite superficial to start to think of OCD in these very narrow buckets of themes. And we think, okay, I'm only dealing with HOCD, or I have relationship OCD, or I'm dealing with contamination OCD. And to only think that we have a problem with that because that's what causes us the anxiety. That's like somebody who's struggling with alcohol saying like, oh, I don't have a problem with alcohol, my problem's with whiskey. I only have really bad things happen when I drink a lot of whiskey. So then they start drinking something else, and of course, those bad things will also start happening. And if they were somebody with OCD, they might go, oh no, now my OCD has jumped themes. Is that normal? Is that okay? What's going wrong? Oh no, but nothing changed. Only the superficial elements are different. So when it comes to tackling the compulsions, look beyond the superficial elements, look at patterns. It's the behavioral pattern, experiencing some urge and anxiety and uncertainty, and then engaging in that behavior to try to cope with and check on and control that feeling and get rid of it. That's where OCD is at. And when it comes to cutting out the compulsion, it really helped me to cut it out everywhere. I couldn't just say I was dealing with one thing just because that was what was bothering me. When you look at it as a pattern, I could see that pattern in so many different places in my life. And maybe those different areas didn't bother me as much, but I was still practicing that pattern. I was still getting good at it. And that was only feeding the areas that were causing the problem. So if I wanted to really deal with this, I had to not just look at it superficially, but dig under, find those patterns, and cut those out, because those were the compulsion. So the next 3 insights I'm going to talk about are practices that will really help cutting out those compulsions. And the first one is to look at the systems surrounding the compulsions and make changes there. This is about making it easier for yourself, especially at the beginning. And it's all about making changes in the things that lead up to you engaging in compulsions. So for example, if you've noticed that when you come home at the end of the day, you turn on your computer, you sit down at your computer, and you start engaging in all sorts of compulsive behaviors, even though you think you're not going to do that, and this time's going to be different, and your brain's telling you, well, this time I'm just going to check this, and then I'm going to check that, and then I'm going to go and make a good dinner for myself. But then before you know it, you've been on the computer, it's 9 o'clock at night, you're still playing a game, or you're still surfing porn, or you're still looking at videos, whatever it is, and you realize, that happened again, I want to change that. So that might be one of the compulsions you're going to cut out. But if you want to make that easier for yourself, we want to back up a bit in the system. It's very difficult to resist compulsions at first. Just like how if it's somebody who's been struggling with alcohol, they're probably not going to want to go to a bar or a party at first when they're first starting to not drink, because it's just going to be incredibly difficult. People are going to be asking them why they don't have a drink, do they want to drink, people are going to be giving them drinks. So at first, they're going to take a step back. So in this case, say somebody who's dealing with all sorts of compulsions on their computer, why not turn on the computer when you get home? All of the compulsions come after turning on the computer. You'll probably notice that it just becomes so automatic. I get home, I turn on my computer, I go and grab a drink, I sit down at the computer, and I'm really convinced this time's gonna be different, and of course it's not. Well, change something in the system before the compulsions start. Say you're struggling with sexual addiction issues and sexual compulsions, all sorts of things like that. You might have all sorts of hookup apps on your phone. It's going to be really difficult to resist hooking up with people at first. Delete the apps. Then even look at when you pull your phone out, or when do you try to hook up with people. What's often going to be the case is that it's going to be easier to make those changes further upstream. Research into addiction, particularly alcoholism, have shown that the environment has a profound impact on our brains when it comes to craving whatever we've been addicted to. And so it's likely that this is the same process that happens with OCD. Our brain recognizes we're in the environment, everything is in place for us to engage in the compulsions that are going to give us that wonderful hit of dopamine in our brain, and the urge starts to bubble up. It really helps to change the environment, change the order that you do things in before you normally start engaging in the compulsion. That's going to be easier because your brain hasn't started to say, hey, do you want to do this? Hey, come on, let's do this. Figure out what happens before you start engaging in compulsions and make changes there. The fourth insight is to watch out for something that I like to call addict math. Addict math is the type of math, the very reasonable, rational math that we like to engage in when we're trying to come up with an equation that equals us engaging in our compulsions. Regardless of the compulsions you're dealing with, you can probably think of times when you've done this, you're trying to cut it out, but then you start to think, well, it was a really stressful week at work, I made it through the week without engaging in the compulsion. It'll really help me next week if I just relieve some of this stress. Right? They say you should deal with things, and then you can move on. And it is a Tuesday. It's a reward. I've been doing really well lately. So I saw 2 red cars on the way home from work. I'm gonna be alone for the rest of my life. The memory just feels so real. This time will probably be different. I feel great and I can handle this because I know what I'm doing, because I am smart and I am rational and I am reasonable. I'm just not ready for this. I feel like I can feel it. I saw an ugly cloud today. This anxiety is too much anxiety and I want to get rid of it. If I engage in this compulsion, then I'll be able to get the work done later tonight that I was going to do, so I should really just do it and get it out of the way quickly. I deserve it. Unicorns don't exist and it's her fault. I'm just really bummed out about that. Therefore, and it just doesn't matter how many reasons you come up with. And it's really helpful to watch out for when your brain starts to do all that rationalizing and trying to add things up to make an argument for why you should go back into your compulsions. They're going to seem very, very reasonable, and it's going to seem like you need to engage in compulsions to get something else that you really want in life. How complex the equation gets, how simple the equation is, how reasonable the equation sounds, it is all bullshit. You lied to me, brain. That's where something like having values comes up, where we say, okay, it doesn't really matter what my brain's thinking right now, I'm sticking to my values, I'm doing what I know is healthy and what I know is going to make me healthy in the long term. Keep your eye on what's healthy for you in the long term. So the fifth and final insight that I want to talk about is to deal with all of the underlying machinery, the judgments and the beliefs and the desires that lead us towards engaging in all of those compulsions, to deal with the uncertainty and the anxiety that bubbles up from all of those unhelpful beliefs and judgments and desires. For instance, if you believe very strongly that you shouldn't feel anxiety in social situations, and you used to engage in compulsions when you're in social situations to try to control your anxiety and cope with it and try to relax, and you cut out those compulsions. And you're still going into situations and feeling anxiety and be like, oh, like I really don't want to feel this. And then you're reacting negatively to that. You're judging yourself for feeling anxiety. You shouldn't feel anxiety. Now that you have that, you feel you need to engage in some compulsion to get rid of it because you think you have to not feel anxious when you're talking to people. Then even though you've cut out the compulsion, you're still going to be struggling with this desire to have a compulsion, to have something you can do to relieve that feeling. Whereas it's far more helpful to actually throw out that belief that you can't talk to people while you feel anxiety, that you can't do healthy things while you feel anxiety, or even the belief that there's anything wrong with anxiety. If you believe very strongly that what matters most is what others think about you, and you're often engaging in compulsions to control what they think. So you're lying to them, you're spending just hours and hours trying to manipulate the way you look and how you look on social media and creating pictures so that people will think about you a certain way. You say, okay, I have a problem here, and you cut out those compulsions. But then if you don't also deal with that really unhelpful belief that what matters most is what others think about you, then you're going to find yourself in a very, very difficult position because you're going to believe that your self-esteem depends on what others think and say and do in relation to you. But you've just cut out the compulsions, so you have no way of getting that feedback. So you're going to feel this intense pressure to find new compulsions and new ways to try to control and manipulate other people. But that's really unhelpful. It's far more valuable to throw out that belief and recognize that you are just inherently a great person and that your self-esteem comes from inside of you, not from outside of you. OCD did not magically fall from the sky. It grows over time, and we really need to look at the seeds we're planting in our lives that grow into the weed of OCD. A big part of building recovery is going to be getting rid of those compulsions, not being superficial, so digging in and finding those underlying behavioral patterns and not seeing OCD as something that comes in these very narrow buckets. Changing the systems surrounding the compulsion. So making it easier for ourselves by making changes in the environment and the other systems in our lives. Watching out for addict math, remembering that your brain will always be able to think of reasons to engage in compulsions that you know will make you miserable. And 5, dealing with that underlying machinery. So the judgments and the beliefs and the desires that are really unhelpful and that keep pushing us back into the compulsions. But those are things we can throw out. We can bring far more helpful beliefs into our lives. The judgments, you can just get rid of those completely.